Good evening, everyone. We are back in our study in the book of Daniel. And one of our challenges now in Daniel chapter 11, as discussed yesterday, is that it provides a lot of details with regards to what happened at the time of the Grecian Empire. Now, at this point in time, it is not yet at the Grecian Empire. The Grecian Empire is slowly building up, but at this point in time, it is still in the Medo Persian Empire. It's in the very early stages. And so we saw in the first few verses yesterday how there were four kings that will come after Darius the Mede. And after the fourth king who fought against the Grecian king, and in this case, the Macedonian king, that would be Alexander the Great, we're told that he is able to really have dominance all across the then known world, very much from Macedonia all the way to the east, to India and all the way south to the northern part of Africa. Now, with this said, he died in the battle as he tried to conquer the Persian Empire. After that, we read in verse 4 that he did not pass the throne to his sons. In fact, he said, May the strong one take charge, and his two sons were killed along the way. The strongest of all is really one of his generals by name of Ptolemy, and he actually took the southern territory of Egypt. Now, as he took the southern, he also took what we call the Holy Land. The area of the Seleucid is one of the generals of Ptolemy. He decided to take charge of this part, the Syrian part, as well as what we call Eastern Turkey. Now, that would be the Seleucid Empire or the Seleucid dynasty. Why am I talking about these? Is because we are now in verse 5. Verse 5 says, Then, and this word then really is and then, after all things said and done, split into the four generals. We now focus on what we call the Seleucid and Ptolemy dynasty. The Seleucid is the north, and the Ptolemy is the south. Now, remember, whenever we talk about north and south, we are very much focused on Jerusalem, north of Jerusalem, south of Jerusalem. It's always with regard to the bearing of the Holy Land, the promised land. So now we read, the king of the south will grow strong. And that will tell us it will be this king, Ptolemy. He will be so strong that he, along with one of his princes, in verse 5, uh, and this is what it says, along with one of his princes who will gain ascendancy over him and rule. His domain will be a great realm indeed. And this talks about Seleucus the first. We have the way that we name the individuals, uh, and it is important. The founding member of the Seleucid Empire would be Seleucus the first. It's always done that way, and then Ptolemy would be uh, Ptolemy the first. So what is happening here is this: the Seleucid Empire is really ruled by one of the generals of Ptolemy, which will be one of his princes. And he will go and take over this place. Now, one of the things that has happened is that as he began to rule over this area of Syria, and particularly Syria and Babylonia, he had to run away back to Ptolemy because Antigonus from the Persian Empire started coming out. And so he sought help from Ptolemy, and Ptolemy went to fight. So now we have Ptolemy the first, and then we have Seleucus the first. As Antigonus was weakened, the Seleucus came back to the north. And so what you're going to see now is I'm going to tell you a little bit of the historical story. It is something which is necessary, at least for these first few verses, so that you have an idea how history fits into the prophecy. Yesterday, I had said that the details, or at least the prophetic description or narrative in chapter 11, seems to be too specific, that the opponents of the book of Daniel seems to think that it was written after everything had happened, and so you wrote it back and call it prophecy. But we are looking at it forward, talking about the Seleucid dynasty. The Seleucid dynasty is Seleucus the First, and what's important is the Seleucid Empire did not continue to be called Seleucus the second, the third, the fourth. So we have in verse 5 history as in the form of narrative, history in the form of storytelling, that we should now be aware that Ptolemy is the stronger. Seleucus came out of Ptolemy and started his own dynasty of the north. So we have here the king of the south is very strong. One of his generals went up north and started this. And this domain is big. It's very big. Why? Because after it captured Persia, it went to capture the whole of Syria, a little bit to the western, but more to the eastern. So you find that Seleucus the first was also, in fact, very greedy. He wants more and more of his empire. Now back to storytelling, verse 6. It says, and after some years, now this after some years in verse 6 literally means at the end, at the end of years. So we have at the end of many years. So it's not, it's after some years, but it's the end of a number of years. So the text doesn't tell us how long, but something happens after that, after a number of years. Now, what does that mean? It means that after Seleucus the first died, after Ptolemy the founder died. Now, interestingly, in the south, Ptolemy is the founder, and his son is called Ptolemy the first. And in the Seleucid Empire or dynasty, the son of Seleucus was not called Seleucus the second. The son of Seleucus was called Antiochus the first, and thereby started the series of reign by the Antiochus titles. So after some years, they will form an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to reach an agreement. What really did happen is this. By verse 6, we already have Ptolemy the second. Ptolemy the second was reigning, and in the north it would have been Antiochus the second, which means that this, at the end of many years or after some time, talks about a skipping of one generation. Who is that generation? Ptolemy the first, Antiochus the first. Both of that generation was skipped, and then it jumps into this particular episode. So we find that they will form an alliance. Who will form an alliance? Ptolemy and Seleucid. The south and the north will form an alliance. That alliance was actually formed when the daughter of Ptolemy, by the name of Berenice, Berenice was married to Antiochus, who actually had to divorce his first wife, and his first wife is Laodice. And hereby comes the difficulty. The alliance was by marriage. Now, in those days, you find that peace treaties come with the hand. And so Antiochus II, who is the ruler of the Seleucid Empire, is now formed an alliance with Ptolemy II through the marriage of Berenice, the daughter of Ptolemy, to Antiochus II, and thereby sealed the alliance. We now can tell, but she will not keep her position of power. What does that mean? Not long thereafter, you find that Berenice is not able to keep her throne, or you can say her title as the wife of Antiochus II. Now, by this time, we know two things. Uh, Laodice had two children, and Berenice had one son. So interestingly is this. What we find is she, and by she, we're talking about Berenice, cannot keep her power because that would be the daughter. So we're always talking about context. Nor will he remain in his power. And that would be Antiochus the second. That's the marriage. But she will be given up along those who brought her in, and the one who fathered her as well as he who supported her in times. So, what does all this actually mean? So, what you will find is this: she will be given up, which means that in this marriage, sometime thereafter, she would be sold out. He will not remain in his power. Antiochus II actually dies. And so, and as well as the one who fathered her as well, which is Ptolemy II, also dies. So now we have a challenge. Ptolemy II dies, then we have Ptolemy III. Antiochus II dies, then we have a problem. Now, before that, what's going to happen is this. When Ptolemy II dies, Antiochus II decided he doesn't want Berenice anymore. The relationship has run out of his course. He went back to his wife, Laodice. Now, in a story, and as I tell you, history is storytelling. So I'm going to tell you the story with regards to all these. Laodice apparently wanted to preempt the fact that Antiochus II could give his successor to the son of Berenice. And so it says here, he will not remain in his power. She will be given up, Berenice, along with those brought in with her, meaning her entire troop, because Berenice came with her entourage. And the one who fathered her as well would be Ptolemy II, who supported her in those times. He died. After he died, he couldn't support Berenice anymore. So what's going to happen is Antiochus went back to Laodice. Berenice is by herself. She went to hide in Syria. And so the story goes anyway. So you find that there could be a few versions of the story. Now, one of those versions of the story says Laodice was worried that Antiochus II would let the son of Berenice take over the throne of the Seleucid Empire. And so she took action to kill Berenice and her son. That's one of the ways. And then she poisoned Antiochus II, thereby gotten rid of all the opposition. That is one particular aspect of the story. There are those who challenge the fact that, well, maybe this kind of gruesome murder is just a good tale, but may not have happened because there are not such intricate documentation, merely a lot of hearsay here and there. But I'm just trying to suggest this to you mainly because the text doesn't say how Antiochus II died. The text doesn't say how Ptolemy II died. The text only says that Ptolemy, who fathered her, cannot support her, which is true. He died. And Berenice could not be supported. Antiochus lost his power. How? He was poisoned. By who? We really don't know. Did Laodice kill Berenice and his son? One version says so, the other version, maybe not. Maybe not. But what happened is the successor to Ptolemy II would be the son called Ptolemy III. And he would run to Syria to rescue his sister Berenice. By the time he got there, she had died. And so now we find that we have a big challenge in our hands. And so we now read verse 7. But one of the descendants of her line will arise in his place, and he will come against their enemy and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he will deal with them and prevail. And this is known as Ptolemy the third, the brother, basically. And so as he went to the north to rescue Berenice and found that she had died, he continued to conquer a large part of the northern Seleucid Empire. That is how the story goes. So again, I'm telling you that this is very much a very interesting story. So as Ptolemy the Third went to conquer, he captured a large part of the Seleucid Empire. Verse 8. And he will also take into captivity to Egypt their gods with their cast metal images, their precious vessels of silver and gold, and he, on his part, will refrain from attacking the king of the north for some years. So what's happening here is, as Ptolemy the Third went to do a little bit of conquering, he took a lot of booty and brought it back to Egypt, which tells us this is Ptolemy the Third. And Antiochus the Third Laodice's son, who ascended to the throne, lost a large part of the territory. That is something to be seen. But the son of Laodice, called Antiochus III, will grow up because there is time. Antiochus III grows up slowly but strongly, and Ptolemy III came back to the south and stayed there and did not go to disturb the king of the north for many years. For many years. Verse 9. Verse 9 tells us this. Then the latter year will enter the realm of the king of the south, which would be Ptolemy, and this here would be Ptolemy the third, will return to his own land of the south. Now, what is important is that we understand that there is a period of lull. The Bible in Daniel chapter 11 is purely interested with regard to the north and the south relative to Jerusalem, relative to the promised land, God's land. For the large part, Ptolemy had owned that land. And of course, the Seleucid Empire is also very interested in the land of Israel. But for the most part, it belonged to Egypt, the south. Verse 10. And his sons will mobilize and assemble a multitude of great forces and will keep on coming and overflow and pass through. Pass through what? Pass through Jerusalem, so that he may wage war up to his stronghold. Now, this idea here talks about, in verse 10, talks about the northern king. His sons will be the northern. This is the general consensus of the Jewish commentators. The idea here is the king of the north, after gaining strength, will start to mobilize, and they will come down to the south. This is where trouble begins, because Antiochus III is a brutal man. What we do find is this. In verse 10, Antiochus III starts to raise forces and begins to have intent to go down to the south. Verse 11. And it says, and the king of the south will be enraged. Why? Because the south did not disturb the north. Now the north decided to disturb the south. And so, and went out and then went out and then fought. And that is what it was trying to say. And then fought with the king of the north. There's a number of and thens here. By this time, you find that Antiochus III has come to the throne. He launches the attack. He goes down south, but his opponent is no longer Ptolemy III. His opponent would be Ptolemy the fourth. So the king of the south is Ptolemy the fourth. He is not so good a king. The king of the north would be Antiochus the third. And Antiochus the third will come down and hammer Ptolemy the fourth. So, and then The latter will raise a great multitude, but that multitude will be handed over to the former, which means that when Ptolemy the fourth tr- tries to fight with Antiochus the third, it was a no can do. They failed miserably. Verse 12 tells us, and multitude is carried away, his heart will be haughty, and he will cause tens of thousands to fall, yet he will not prevail. You find that in verse 12, the multitude will be uplifted instead of carried away. Uh, this is a wrong translation. The multitude is lifted up. Now, what this means is the northern forces is now very proud. Why would he be very haughty? Because he can fight and they win. But we are told that in verse 12, as the multitude of the north is uplifted, they will not prevail. Verse 13, for the king of the north will again raise a greater multitude than before, and after an interval of some years, so this will be at the end, right? At the end of time of years, he will press on with a great army and much equipment. So the fight was incredible, but he could not overpower Ptolemy the fourth. Ptolemy the fourth actually won the battle right here. He will not prevail. So Ptolemy the fourth won. Antiochus the third lost. Now there will be a time to come again. Antiochus the third will not give up. One of the things in history we're told is that Ptolemy the fourth fights well but rules poorly. And while he was ruling poorly, the armies of the north came and overpowered the south. So we read in verse, I guess, verse 14. So verse 14 does tell us how the king of the north, Antiochus the third, will come and how he will prevail. One of the things that we will find is Antiochus the third will succeed Ptolemy the fourth. From here onwards, you know that the numberings are a bit off, right? The numberings are a bit off. Why is the numbering a bit off? Is because the Antiochus the third was lived quite long, right? Lived quite long. The last one is wait just a moment. Mm. So now we can see uh, the king of the north will not give up, but by this time, when we reach verse 14 joins forces with Philip the Fourth of Macedonia. He now tries to borrow strength from other people. And that, I guess, is what we are seeing in verse 14. Verse 14 says, now in those times, many will rise up against the king of the south. The violent ones among your people will also raise themselves to fulfill the vision, but they will fall down. All of these, many, includes Antiochus the third, includes Philip the fifth of Macedonia. They will come and attempt to take the south. For the large part, you find that they were not successful until Antiochus the fourth died. Verse 15. Now, this word in verse 15 is an and then, one of the rare and thens here. It is after Ptolemy the fourth died. Then verse 15 takes place. The son of Ptolemy the fourth is called Ptolemy the fifth. But Ptolemy the fifth was just an infant when Ptolemy the fourth died. And the land is now run by regions. The king of the north is actually Antiochus the third. Still, so he lived quite long. So this is Antiochus the third. And then he will pile up an assault ram, capture a well fortified city, and the forces of the south will not stand their ground, not even their choicest troops, for there will be no strength to make a stand. And so, in this final instance, Antiochus the third becomes the victor. Verse 16 tells us that he who comes, this is he who comes, but he who comes against him will do as he pleases. Now, verse 16 should be translated the one who comes to him. I think would be a better uh, explanation, or this the invader. He who comes is the invader. Against him would be the southern king, and that would be Ptolemy the fifth, the son of Ptolemy the fourth. So the invader is Antiochus the third. Antiochus the third comes and does anything he wants, and no one can withstand him. He will also stay for a time in the beautiful land with destruction in hand. So, for the large part in verse 16, this word here, beautiful land, is actually a glorious land. I think we could translate as glorious land or beautiful land, and this refers to Israel. This part here has become a very interesting place because it has always been guarded and owned by Ptolemy, and now the Seleucid Empire, Antiochus III, wants it too. And so that is something that is, I guess that is something that we now can see the change of hands. The Seleucid Empire, for some reason, loves the Holy Land, but it was always in the control of Ptolemy. Now, with the victory of Antiochus III, he comes to invade, and Ptolemy V cannot win. Cannot win. Antiochus III, as we close, I will let us know. Antiochus III here has a daughter. Antiochus III's daughter is the name Cleopatra. We read of her name all over the place, in the movies in particular. But Cleopatra eventually married Ptolemy the Fourth, and thereby the two dynasties are again in an alliance with Antiochus III in the controlling seat this time. Remember, earlier on, it was Ptolemy II who was in the controlling seat with Antiochus III. Now, Antiochus III is in the controlling seat and gave his daughter Cleopatra to marry Ptolemy V. Now, before we end, I just want to mention one more name. The next name should be familiar to many people, and that would be Epiphanes. Epiphanes is Antiochus the Fourth, and he is the brother of Cleopatra, the son of Antiochus III. And Epiphanes is one of the rulers of the Seleucid Empire that began to enforce the Hellenization of the entire lands that he had conquered, and that includes the Holy Land. But for now, we end in verse 16. I hope that you could follow the storyline. Just at least appreciate that a lot of the details in history fits this chapter so well that you find that this prophecy or the details of this narrative as prophecy is argued by non believers, by the atheists, as having been written after the fact. And so, what I try to do is to give you as much of the information of the history and how it aligns to this chapter. And as far as we are concerned, we see this as a prophetic passage because this book was actually read, particularly, we had mentioned before in verse 3 that it spoke of Alexander the Great. And when he came down to Jerusalem, passing by, wanting to conquer the place, the high priest, according to the writings of Josephus, and also in some parts of the Talmud, suggested that he came out to show Daniel chapter 11 to Alexander the Great, that he was prophesied in the book of Daniel. And as such, we take the position that the book of Daniel is prophetic, was written at the time of Darius the Mede through Cyrus, and now explained to Daniel by the angel Gabriel. So all of these is what we would say divine prophecies. And in divine prophecies, a large number of details is given and how it fits as the history unfolds. I've tried to give the gist of those stories. It can get quite complicated, and as you know, even with the little bit of information, it can already get a bit confusing. And I trust that you'll be able to watch this back and perhaps follow the story a little bit more. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.